Well, listen, this is a treat. This is a treat. I've got none other than TC Boyle on the show. Welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
All right, let's just, for the viewers, Blue Skies. This is book like number 30,
31.
31. So this came out in mid-May. You've been through this a few times now. Is there a familiar sort of arc to what you go through with the release of a book from the first month to the second month, the third month, or does each one have its own giddy up to it?
Oh, what a question. We tour a lot less than we used to. I think COVID
Yeah,
had something to do with that. And also the publishers realized that they can do Zoom instead of sending the author to Cleveland or whatever it is.
right.
And that's okay with me because, of course, I've done this for a long, long time
Yep.
and have done many, many book tours. So that, for instance, with Drop City in 2003, I did 75 cities
Oh,
worldwide,
whoa.
hardcover and paperback. And I love to be before an audience. I love to do interviews like this one. But, it started to wear a bit. So
Yeah.
I'm okay with the balance now. And so, we'll do some interviews with the press and do a little traveling. I did the German tour already. And I also did a couple of cities for this tour, including St. Petersburg and Miami, because
Really? Oh, because the book,
is
yeah.
set partly in
Yeah.
Florida.
So you did the German tour already. I remember talking to Andre Debus. I don't know if you know him or not,
I
but
do. Yes, I
he was
do.
talking about doing a German thing. And he said he went over to do a reading and did not realize until he sat down that the reading was going to be for like 3 hours, 2 hours. They just sat down like a theater and just said, "Here you go, start reading." Was that this might have been in the 1990s? I
No,
don't know if they still
it's
do.
still just like this.
Really?
1,000 people and I sold out, big arena. It's very, very exciting. I'm delighted to have so many fans. I have great fans here as well, but we don't do so many big events anymore, unless it's
Right.
for an arts and lectures kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. You know, so I have to mention this. I feel absolutely obligated. So there's a guy I just interviewed 2 months ago named Joe Milan Jr. I'm not here to pump this book, but it's a lovely book called The All American. And during the conversation, he mentioned we were talking about his journey to fiction writing, which was unusual. But the moment that turned him into a fiction writer was reading a short story called Greasy Lake, which he read some time ago. And it was because of that story that, because of the way you handled characters that reminded him of himself to some degree, that he thought, oh, who I am belongs in a story. Uh, and and then months later, or years later, he published his first book, Interview, and mentioned that I was going to be interviewing you, and he was very excited. He said, "Please tell him." So I share
Well,
that with you.
wait a minute. I'm thrilled, Bill.
Okay,
Absolutely thrilled. Tell him I'm honored and delighted, and that pretty soon, I guess, I'll be founding my own religion.
okay,
This story, Greasy Lake, is my most anthologized and most popular. It's about something we've all gone through. It's
right.
about teenagers trying to butt their heads up against the world to see who they are and what the world is. It's been anthologized a lot, and everybody, male and female, has been down to Greasy Lake at some point in their lives,
Right.
usually in their teenage years.
Yes. And so when you hear that story, so it does that doesn't hearing that doesn't get old for you. That someone was moved to start their own creative life based on something.
I am absolutely thrilled. I mean,
Yeah.
all art comes from other art. We're all turned on in various
Yeah.
ways. One of the most interesting things for me is when I am in a crowd after a reading and signing books and meeting people and talking to them, how so many of them will mention a story or novel of mine as having been, very important to them in their lives. And it's fascinating because why this particular one? I don't know who they are, of course, and I'm not
Yeah.
writing for that individual. It's that's what art can do. It can touch
Yeah.
you on so many levels, and it really is rewarding for me.
I'm always aware when people have read something of mine and they want to talk to me about it. It always feels like I'm aware when they talk to me about it how they have their own book. The book that they read is their
Exactly.
own. I mean, though I authored it, they're talking about experience that they alone have had that you sort of participated in, but really only peripherally. Does
Yeah,
that
well said.
resonate?
Very well said. I think that is the way art touches us.
Yeah.
We take ownership of it as fans, as readers, as viewers of movies, listeners of music. And it means something to us that the author can't really imagine, which is why also book reviewing is so odd in a way,
Thank you.
because even I don't, by the way, I don't participate in even reading the reviews anymore. They're too aggravating. Even the ones
Good for
they
you.
love you, even where they love you, because
Yes.
they
Don't
might
do
love
it.
you for wrong reasons. It
That's
makes you
right.
crazy. I don't really need to know how they interpret it exactly.
Yep.
Um, I like that the audience is interpreting a book. That's fascinating and again an honor for me. But wow, the way they come at it is so various. It's kind of disturbing to you as an artist, and it, I will acknowledge that the art is coming from some deep place. I don't know where it's coming from. Is there
Yeah.
a universal unconscious? I think there is, because I can't imagine where this material is coming from out of my head and into my fingertips. All that is true. Uh, and yet I have a fairly clear vision of what it is once it happens and once it's done. I
Right.
write a
Right.
thesis about the book,
Right.
and it's kind of disturbing to see that other people have such unusual takes on it.
I think I dropped out of college. I just couldn't jive with it. But I remember taking literature and I knew I wanted to write. I knew I was going to be in the creative fields. And so that was really my relationship to literature. And I remember being puzzled, like, well, the professor would be talking about the book, and all I could think was, well, that's your opinion. That's what you like. Who cares what your opinion is?
Right, but
This.
of course, one great way that we communicate as fans of any given art form is to discuss it among ourselves.
It's true.
And a
It's
good
true.
professor will lead a discussion that's open-ended and allow people to make discoveries of what it is that they're talking about, and it can really enrich the experience of reading something. My career, like yours, was a little spotty at first. I didn't do well as an undergrad because I had other priorities, that is, getting drunk
Right.
and finding a woman who could
Yeah.
tolerate me. So when I went back 4 years later to grad school, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a writer and I wanted to go straight for it. And I
Right.
thought it would be helpful if I knew something of the history of our literature. And
Oh,
so when I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop for the MFA, I immediately started taking PhD classes and wound up with my PhD in 19th century British because of I loved the material and I had a very dynamic professor who turned
right.
me on.
Yeah. So did you know, because you strike me as someone who was, I'm just getting a hit off of you as someone who was interested in the creative world even before you went to the Iowa Writers Workshop. Then even
Yes,
as a young man,
I wanted to be a musician. I went
I
to
knew
SUNY
it.
Potsdam,
I knew
the
it.
New York State College for Music. But when I got there, I flunked my audition
Ah,
because I could play my saxophone standing on my head. I could sight transpose, but I
right.
had no feeling for the music they expected us to play. Uh, so then I was there at undergrad school and I declared a history major and then a double major, history and English. And in my junior year, I blended into a creative writing classroom
I see.
and kind of knew what I was going to do. I later, a few years later, I was a singer in an R&B band,
Yeah.
a punk R&B band, and I realized that's what I can do. That you don't have to count beats, you don't have to know anything, you
Right.
just emote. And
Yeah.
it was probably the greatest experience ever. Also, because I never do anything in my life in conjunction with other people. Nothing. I fly solo for better or worse. And so for that small period when I was playing with these guys, it was kind of thrilling on so many levels, the emotional level most of all, but also because here we were going for the same thing at the same moment and
Yeah.
stimulating each other. Music to me is the greatest and most immediate art. I've never written anything without music playing. I listen to music all
Oh,
day long, every day. The only time I don't listen to music is when I'm out in nature by myself. By the way, I can never understand people jogging with earphones and or anything like this.
yeah.
I want to be in nature and part of nature. But otherwise, here, when just before I came on with you, I'm doing my emails and getting ready for the day's work. And of course, I'm listening to music. And once I start writing, I will be listening to music as well.
When you listen to music when you write, lyrics or no lyrics?
No lyrics whatsoever, unless it's in a
Yeah. Okay.
language I don't understand.
Right.
So yeah, the lyrics will take you out of it. So I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
listening to jazz and classical music when
Yeah.
I'm writing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm listening to rock and roll, R&B, reggae, so on.
When you say, I love your description of it, that music is just you, or playing the punk R&B was you just pure, you just had to emote. That was my experience when I first started doing some music performance,
Mm.
and it struck me when I got back into writing music in my 40s, because I found I could do it on the computer, which helped me because I couldn't play the things I was hearing, so it helped me in that way. But I found it improved my writing because it connected me in a way that I had become disconnected. Did you feel that as you described, the pure emoting of punk helps you in your writing in terms of tapping into that emotional
I
connection
think it was
first?
more vice versa.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
the writing first.
Writing isn't, for me, the line is very important. The rhythm and the beat of it is very important, which is why I love to
Yeah.
perform in public and read it out loud. And I read to
Yeah.
my wife every day, not so she can criticize it, but just so I can hear it. I want to hear the beat and how it sounds. So the writers I most admire are writers of beautiful lines. I hope that I'm writing beautiful lines. Yes, of course, at the basis is I'm telling a story and so on, but the use of the metaphors, the use of the description, the way the rhythm works in a given sentence, this is all important to me.
Yeah. And so, as a young man, you must have been a fan of art of all different kinds. But then you start having fairly early, once you start publishing, you start having some success. Certainly, I mean, Water Music was your first novel, or was it your?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
that was where I was first introduced to you. A friend said you must read this, and I said okay, I will, and I did, and I really liked it. And so this is an interesting full circle moment for me. But so then you start publishing, and you start having some success, and you must have had the opportunity to meet some of the people you had admired when you were up and coming and a fan. Did both maybe
Absolutely,
musicians and writers? What was that
absolutely.
like for you?
I've met a lot of people whom I worshipped. Uh,
Yeah.
I think first and foremost among them is Robert Coover,
Ah.
who later in life became a good friend. But it was Coover's Prek Songs and Descants, book of stories that really turned me on. I was kind of directionless, deep into the drug scene in New York,
Yeah.
but still reading and thinking I might write something. And I had begun to write some stories sort of in that mode. And here they were fully formed, and he just turned me on. Garcia Marquez is another one, Calvino, Gutierrez, the absurdist playwrights, all of that stuff turned me on in the moment to writing as something that's alive rather than something that's in a textbook.
Right.
And I
Right.
did to meet, most of the writers I admired over the years, and sometimes be on stage with them, and sometimes be friends with them. And it was pretty thrilling. And some musicians too, over the years.
So you talked about, so you've done, so 31 books, most of them novels. Like one, how many short story collections? Two?
12 short story
Oh,
collections,
12.
and
All right.
19 novels.
It's a lot of stuff, a lot of stories, a lot of
Yeah,
stories.
there
And
are a lot of stories.
it's a lot of stories.
And one of the problems with that is, so there's probably 200 stories,
Yep.
aside from the novels. And when I'm in a story mode, as I have just been after finishing Blue Skies, I think of an idea. I think, wow, And then I realized, wait a minute, you've already written that story.
That's what
No.
I was going to ask you. Does that happen at
It
this
does,
point?
but the world is so fresh and so interesting. I have a story in the New Yorker this past week, and it derived from my desire to talk about COVID guilt. The story is
Hmm.
called "The End Is Only a Beginning." What is it in the 21st? Here, oh, here it is, right here.
Oh,
It's
there
in
it is,
this.
people. Go get it, people. Go get it. Very good.
The thing with the New Yorker is there's a new issue out already,
Yeah.
uh, and so I wrote a story about a guy having guilt because he brought COVID back from France with him
Ah,
early on in the beginning of the pandemic before we knew what it was. I also wrote a story that's in the last book of stories about the pandemic, the 13th day. And oh yeah, it's in this one, the 13th day.
mm-hmm.
It's I wrote it in the beginning of the pandemic when we didn't know what was going on. I mean,
Yeah.
this one that's in the New Yorker, I'm looking back, but that was in the moment. I had no idea what was going on, but I was fascinated, always been fascinated by disease, and I've written a lot about it. And in this case, the cruise ships that
Oh, yeah.
could not find port. So I
Right.
meditated on that in March of the year that this began, before we knew what it
Right.
was.
It was just starting.
Yeah, so
Trump
of
was
all
saying,
the
don't come. It's not
exactly,
real.
exactly.
Right.
So of all the stories in Walk Between the Raindrops, that one has a date stamp at the end of it because I wanted people to know that this was an imagining in the beginning of the pandemic. And in fact, my agent held the story back for about a year because he felt what was happening was too frightening
Yeah.
for this story to come out at that very moment. And
Yeah.
it is, as you'll see, it's a kind of humorous story, but of course, like most of my humor, it's blackly dark underneath.
Right. Right. And so, but you're still interested. You still look around and you see stories. I mean, I know it sounds kind of silly in a way, but I have met people who were creative people, engaged people, and I realized they had they were done looking. They had kind of run out of for they
I'm
were towards the
lucky.
end of their life.
I'm lucky because the way I interpret the world is through fiction. That's the way I do it. I mean, I can express myself here with you, but
Right.
that really is not deep or meaningful for me in the way that the story itself on the page is, because there I'm discovering things.
Yeah.
So, as I was saying, after this novel, I've done 6 new stories, and now I'm into the next novel. And
Yeah.
at the end of that, I'll hope to have 6 or 7 more new ones. And that's the way I work. So there'd be two novels, a collection of stories, 2 novels, a collection of stories. That's the way it works.
That's okay.
Half before a novel, half after a novel, because you do run out of ideas. And
Right.
so in this one, the first story I wrote in this one was in Esquire in July called Sanctuary. And during the time of writing uh, Blue Skies, all of this crap with Trump was going on, which
Right.
infuriates me and makes me completely crazy. But I
Right.
couldn't address it because I'm locked into a novel. So the first
Right.
story is called Sanctuary, and in it you will meet a woman with a red MAGA hat on. So the stories often reflect what's happening now and what confuses me and interests me in the
Right.
moment.
Right. In the moment, because so that's what I was going to ask you is I was talking to Paul Harding, who wrote the book
Mhm,
Tinkers, but
mhm.
and he just released his latest
Yes.
one, and it was a great conversation. And the thing he landed on, which I really liked, which I very much ascribed to myself, which is he said, "Look, no presumptions." He felt no presumptions, even in every sentence. Don't presume you know what the sentence is even before you write the sentence. Like discover, 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 whether you outline or not, but just purely discovery. Does
It's
that
like what we were talking about
resonate?
earlier with music.
Yeah.
Uh, it's improvisatory, purely.
Yeah.
Yes, maybe music when I'm standing up there in those days at the microphone, and you can listen to me doing, I put my spell on you with the ventilators at tcboyle.com.
Okay.
Have your ears burn a little bit. Uh, it's 99% emotion and maybe
Yeah.
1% control. With what I'm doing on the page, I would say it's maybe 90% emotion or you're unconscious and maybe 10% control. And in this real spell of it, as you know, you're completely lost in some other
Yes.
dimension,
Yes.
and that is the beauty of it. That's why I do it. This
Yep.
is why, by the way, even though I have my PhD and was a professor for many, many years, I didn't want to be a man of letters and give speeches and write essays on various occasions, because there is nothing that turns me on like creating in the moment. It's what takes you out of your life. And it's why we need art so desperately, because we live in a fathomless universe that is antithetical to us and horrible, actually. And the mystery kills us. And I want to address the mystery, and this is the only way I can do it.
I've always felt that that moment that you were describing, of where you kind of go down the rabbit hole and you lose track of time and you're lost in the mystery, that to me, I don't know, you wouldn't, I would tell my students, don't write if you don't enjoy that moment. Like, because really, whether you get published or not, or how much money you'll make or not, that moment of becoming lost in what you're creating, whether it's poetry or memoir or fiction, or doesn't matter.
Or even writing an essay for class.
Exactly.
It's the same
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah.
You fumble around, and then for some moments you're not there anymore.
That's right. That's right. And I write about my own life. I take personal essays, and I lose track of myself. And I want to lose track of myself. The person on the page who has my name, I think of as like a character, in a story. And that becoming lost, it's a strange thing though, isn't it, TC? Because you're becoming lost. I feel like I both discover myself and lose myself at the same time. Does that make sense? Lose one sense of myself, maybe.
I don't know. I've not written much autobiographical stuff, although, it's people who know my work.
I'm just talking about writing in general. In other words, that sense of becoming sort of transparent. I feel like I lose one sense of myself, but become reconnected to a deeper sense of who I am.
It's more like being God. You're the God of a universe that is under complete control. Whereas as soon as you step away from it, you're in a universe that is fathomless.
Yeah.
And horrible. So I can agree with you there.
Yeah.
That's part of the thrill of it. But I was saying, I haven't written much autobiographical stuff because my mind has always been jumping to craziness and any kind of scenario. I feel I could write a story about anything from any perspective, and that keeps me excited. But I have written some. You mentioned Greasy Lake. That is autobiographical elements, although it's not an autobiographical story. Up Against the Wall, If the River Was Whiskey. People who know my work well can point to some of these stories, and that's part of what I do. But a smaller part than just pure invention.
But the invention is autobiographical. I mean, that's not really the best use of the word, but you have to find what you're interested in. In other words, if I said, write a story about a pirate, and you wrote a story about a pirate, and I wrote a story about a pirate, and your daughter wrote a story about a pirate, they would not be the same story, obviously, right? So the thing that uniquely interests you is, I don't think there's anything more you than what turns you on. Yeah.
Yes. And so back to the beginning of our conversation with people who read and interpret your work, this is why we have no idea how they will see a given work, because their idea of this pirate is completely individual to them.
Yeah. I always think, I don't know if you ever think this way, but it's been my mission to say, I want to live my life away from the desk the way I feel while I'm writing. As much as possible, I want how I feel when I'm just going around the world to feel like, I know I can't ever completely replicate it because there is this sort of control one has, but that's what I'm shooting for. That is
no big deal. No big deal. Aged dark rum. That'll do it.
You think that'll get me there?
Yeah. When I'm not writing, of course, I'm trying to keep this house from falling down, as we all must.
Right.
But almost every day, as you can tell from my Twitter feed, I am out of doors. Usually with the dog and by myself. I like to be in nature alone. I don't want to go on a hike with a bunch of people and chatter away. I just want to be alone, whether it's at the beach or up in these mountains here or taking the kayak out. I need that, and I have that every day for a couple of hours. And of course, I go out to the beach or to the mountains, and I go someplace where I know I won't see anybody, and settle down and read a book or meditate, look around. That calms me and allows my brain to go into some kind of other meditative state.
Yeah. All right. So book 31, Blue Skies. I have one more question for you. And so you've got your thinking hat on there, I see. And so just finish the sentence without thinking about it. If writing, all the writing you've done has taught you anything, it's taught you what?
What has writing taught me?
Yeah.
That life is a disaster and we're all doomed.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Your experience of writing your actual experience of being in the writing has taught you that life is a disaster and we're all doomed.
Yeah, and I suspected it before I started writing, but writing
It's just confirmed it.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, that's great. T.C. Boyle, thank you. This has been awesome. This has been a lot of fun.
That's great, Bill. Thank you.